he sends Ged off to be trained by a school of wizards. I know that sounds very Harry Potter, very King Killer Chronicles, but don't worry, unlike those novels, A Wizard of Earthsea is actually good.
You need to leave!
Yes! I've compiled a list of 7 books I highly recommend you read while you wait for The Winds of Winter. Have no fear, no book on this list is part of an uncompleted series. We're not trading one problem for another, so you'll find no Stormy Archives or King Killers here. This list will be spoiler-free. Anyway, let's get into it. We're going to start this list off strong with entry number 1, Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn. If you read no other books on this list, these are the ones you want to read. Memory, Sorrow, and Thorn is an epic fantasy trilogy written by Tad Williams in 1988. It is sometimes known as the 4-book trilogy because the manuscript for Book 3, Two Green Angel Tower, was so long it had to be published in 2 volumes for the paperback version. MST is about the medieval kingdom of Osten Ard. High King John the Presbyter is dying, and his 2 sons and heirs, Joshua and Elias, do not get along. Elias, as the elder brother, is expected to follow his father and sit the Dragonbone chair, which is this world's equivalent of the Iron Throne. However, Elias's popularity has fallen as of late. His dark moods and paranoia has the realm wondering if he is mentally fit to rule. It does not help that Elias' newest advisor is a man called Pyrotes, a red priest with an ill reputation. Many nobles push Joshua to dispose of his brother and to claim the Dragonbone chair as his own, but Joshua, also called Lackhand because his sword hand was cut off long ago, does not want it. He never has. This does not stop Elias from suspecting his brother is planning some treason. The feud between the brothers erupts into full-blown civil war. Many other kings, princes, and lesser nobles enter the fray. Some for Joshua, some for Elias, and others for themselves. And as the realm tears itself apart, dark whispers from the north began to trickle down into the south. In the cold mountains of Nakiga, an ancient enemy is stirring. An enemy the people of Osten Ard had believed to be long dead. Winter is coming, and with it comes the Norns, an ancient race of elven-like beings that once dwelled in Osten Ard until humans came to drive them out. Now, they're returning to retake the lands that were once theirs. These immensely powerful magical beings have nothing but a deep hatred for humanity. They can travel through dreams, destroy castle walls with a single word, and even raise the dead. Humanity must set aside their differences to fight these frozen foes or else be destroyed. I really hope I don't have to explain further why this is a must-read for any A Song of Ice and Fire fan. I'm not the first person to notice the similarities between the 2 series. Others have made lists comparing what Martin borrowed from Tad Williams' series for his own 7-book series. Well, 5 right now because the man can't even be bothered to. Martin himself has not been shy about acknowledging Williams as an inspiration. If you're curious about reading these books, do not spoil yourself before you read them. All the things you like about A Song of Ice and Fire can be found here. The same mysteries, foreshadowing, treacherous prophecies, secret identities, descriptions of arms and armor.
Alright, I get it!
All of that can be found in this series. And the best thing, it's done. So if you get invested, all the books are there, and not to mention, Williams has blessed us with short stories, novellas, and also a sequel series he's about to finish in just 1 more book. The sequel series was going to be a trilogy, but the last book got so big, he ended up turning it into 2 separate novels. The tale grew in the telling. Why y'all fantasy writers can't be economical? And if you don't want to read the sequel series because it's not done, you don't have to. The original trilogy is right there, complete and ready to read. Have fun. The second entry on this list is the trilogy called The Sword of Spirits. Written in 1970 by John Christopher, The Sword of Spirits is set in a post-apocalyptic Great Britain. An unspecified ecological disaster has knocked human civilization back to ye olde medieval times, which means we're back to riding horses, swinging swords, and having really short life expectancies. Using technology from the before time is strictly forbidden and is punishable by death. The main character of the story is 13-year-old Luke. He lives in the city of Winchester, which is a real place in Hampshire, England. We learn that Winchester is just one of several walled cities that are almost constantly at war with one another. These other cities, like Petersfield and Romsey, are like petty kingdoms, and the wars between them are fought for supremacy and limited resources. Winchester is ruled by a prince. Luke's father is one of the city's captains. A captain in this case is something like a knight. Because of his father's rank, Luke lives a privileged though very middle-class lifestyle among the lesser nobility. Due to a series of strange and surprising events, Luke's father rises to the role of Prince of Winchester. This is a huge shock because Luke's father was not in the line of succession. It was never in his cards for him to rule. Another twist is that Luke, not his older brother Peter, is named as heir and the prince in waiting. Now swept up in politics and prophecy, Luke must learn how to play the most dangerous game. Winchester's very own Game of Thrones. War, betrayal, trial by combat, and beheadings soon follow, which leads me to why you should read it. The Sword of Spirits shares several things with the A Song of Ice and Fire books. Luke's father is very much like Ned Stark, a nobleman who's been thrust into a position of power that he was not prepared for. The petty fighting between the cities reminds me very much of the Seven Kingdoms and their various feuds. There's even a sect that reminds me of the Maesters. Now, don't go into these books expecting something large or as intricate as Martin's work. These are not doorstopper books. The novels are quite short. A voracious reader could read through the entire trilogy in one day. That's by no means a downside. I'm not throwing shade here. Not every fantasy novel needs to reach maximum manuscript length to be satisfactory. World building doesn't have to be dense. Editors, you have to stop letting these writers get away with it.
You can't keep getting away with it! You can't keep getting away with it!
The Sword of Spirits is a strong story told simply. It won't take up too much of your time, but you will have enjoyed spending time with it, and it will stick with you long after you're done. Up next on the list is The Pillars of the Earth. I feel like the title is supposed to be said dramatically, but I don't know how to use voice filters on this. The Pillars of the Earth is a historical fiction novel written by Ken Follett and published in 1989. It is set in the 12th century in the completely fictional town of Kingsbridge, England, which is wild to me because how is a place called Kingsbridge in medieval England not real? During this time, England is in a terrible civil war, one that would come to be known as the Anarchy. Things got so bad during this war, the chroniclers of the time wrote that it was like Christ and all his saints had fallen asleep. Some people seem to believe that the concept of war crimes is a new thing, when no, they're not. Anyway, the plot of the book doesn't follow the war specifically. It focuses mainly on the construction of a cathedral.
All right, now, it ain't that funny.
Stop, wait, no, come back. Listen, hold on, let me cook. That might not sound like the most exciting basis for a story, but the building of this new grand church becomes the focal point of a lot of controversies and clashes in the land. And then the nearby priory, whose monks ordered the construction of the cathedral, becomes filled with its own political drama. We follow several POV characters in this book. We see the world through their perspective, just like in A Song of Ice and Fire. Yes, even the villains, one of whom surely had to be the inspiration for Ramsay Snow. There is Tom Builder and his family, who are very much House Stark-like. They're not nobly born, but they are earnest and hardworking, and arguably the family you end up rooting for the most. Tom Builder, as you may have guessed, is hired to work on the new epic cathedral. There's Ellen and her son, Jack Jackson. Ellen may or may not have magical powers. That is up to you to decide. Jack Jackson is her bastard born of mysterious parentage, so you kinda know where that's going. There's Elenia Bartholomew and her brother, two young nobles whose family is betrayed, their lands confiscated by bitter rivals. Now disposed of their family's castle, Elenia and her brother spin the story trying to take back what was once theirs. There are battles, betrayals, plots, and schemes, which leads me to why you should read it. The anarchy this book draws inspiration from was also the inspiration for The Dance of the Dragons. So an A Song of Ice and Fire fan might have some interest, but this book isn't so much about the succession crisis itself, but how the war it created affects those who are not actively participating in it. It's about how the innocents suffer when the highborn play their Game of Thrones. So it's like getting a POV from the ground level of the War of Five Kings, or the Dance of the Dragons. If you've ever wanted to know how the small folk might have felt, this kind of gives you a glimpse of that. Yeah, there are a few scenes where we meet a king or a prince or an empress, but this isn't about a crown or castle, it's about a church. I promise you, it's way more interesting than it sounds. Also, this book does what Martin intended to do when he first set out to write A Song of Ice and Fire. There are many time jumps. We follow these characters for decades. Some grow from children into adults with children of their own. We see adults grow old and lose some vigor. Others don't grow at all because, dead. You'll have to read to find out who. I could see a fantasy writer taking this one book and turning it into a trilogy of novels, or more. Thankfully, that didn't happen here. This is the first book in a series called the Kingsbridge series. The sequel is called A World Without End. Next is A Column of Fire. Then Evening and the Morning. I have the second book, but I haven't read it just yet, so I can't recommend it. But here's the thing. Pillars of the Earth is a standalone novel. The sequel takes place years after, and all the characters from book 1 are now dead as hell. So you don't have to read the sequel if you don't want to. And hey, once you're done, go on and watch the adaptation. It's good. So next on the list, The Spice Must Flow. It was interesting finding out that no one actually says that in the book. Alright, so boom, Dune. I'm not going to spend too much time on this one. You are probably already familiar with it. There's a new big budget adaptation of the first book starring that demon twink Timothée Chalamet and Zendaya. The sequel just came out. Chances are you've already seen it. Chances are you've already fucked your Dune cup. Alright, so Dune is about a kid named Paul and his dad, Duke Leto Atreides, and his mother, Jessica.
It's me! Jessica!
That was the first thing I thought of when I started this book, because it's sci-fi fantasy, and she's just called Jessica.
What? Oh, I'm serious.
And the main character, he's just Paul. I'm sorry, I'll behave. Let me stop making fun of this book before Quinn's Ideas kicks down my front door. Paul's dad gets a new job as overseer of a planet called Arrakis, also known as Dune, Desert Planet. The previous overseer of Arrakis was Baron Vladimir, head of House Harkonnen. The Atreides will move into the Baron's old house and take over all the Baron's old stuff. The Baron kind of messes up his old stuff and takes any good equipment with him before he leaves, which is pretty rude. He also leaves an assassin living in the walls of the estate so that the assassin can kill Paul.
On a demand.
They tried to take the life of my son!
They have my son!
My wife and son are dead!
Sci-fi fantasy dads, am I right? The Atreides used to rule a different planet called Caladan, and they are rivals with the Harkonnens, so it's kind of weird that the Emperor, who has decided all of this, offered to place them on a strange new world occupying a role that once belonged to their rivals. That's because
It's a trap!
Arrakis itself is a strange place. Water is extremely scarce. The deserts are vast, even endless, yet scientists tell us that somewhere, even now, the deserts are infested with gigantic worms, tunneling creatures that are attracted to movement. The Fremen, the native people, are scarce in number, or so it is believed, and they practice many unusual customs. The planet's main resource is something called spice. It's a highly addictive substance. Prolonged use turns a user's eyes blue. There have been a lot of comparisons between spice as a resource and oil in our own real world. Just like oil, it's incredibly important who controls the flow of the spice. We learn very early on, so this is no spoiler, that the Baron Harkonnen is secretly working to bring about the downfall of House Atreides. The Atreides are kind of aware they are being played, but because they were summoned by the Emperor, they can't really argue or make a huge deal about it. Also, they're not cowards. They plan to meet this challenge head on. This brings me to why you should read it. Dune and A Song of Ice and Fire have many things in common. I am quite sure Martin borrowed several character and story elements from Frank Herbert's influential novel. Daenerys Targaryen shares many aspects with Paul Atreides, both being prophetic figures who ride worms and are cursed with terrible purpose. Also, there's incest. Okay, so the mixing of noble blood in Dune isn't really incest, I suppose, but it is very close. You know how these nobles are, Habsburg jaw. Lady Catelyn Stark has much in common with Lady Jessica. Duke Leto and Ned Stark are both doomed men who find themselves trying to rule from a nest of vipers, and they share similar fates. Spice is a drug in Dune that can cause visions and turn your eyes blue. Shade of the Evening is a drug in A Song of Ice and Fire that can cause visions and it turns your lips blue. Fear is the mind killer. Fear cuts deeper than swords. Both series feature important daggers. The similarities are definitely there. But don't get me wrong, it's not A Song of Ice and Fire in space. Dune is much more philosophical than A Song of Ice and Fire. It's much more heady, no Lena, in that way. And no tea, no shade to Martin, but I don't think A Song of Ice and Fire is anywhere as deep or imaginative. The debate over whether or not Paul Atreides is a white savior doesn't make sense to me because it was clear from the jump, Paul is an asshole. He's a huge asshole. His whole attitude changes the moment he knows his father is dead, and personally, I couldn't stand him as a protagonist. That's not a spoiler, by the way. The book tells you very early on that Leto is dead meat and nothing can be done about it. So it's never a question of whether or not he can be saved. No, he's doomed from page 1, book 1. The story is mostly about Paul and whether or not he's the Kwisatz Haderach. If you want to know more about whatever that is, there is another black guy on YouTube that talks about A Song of Ice and Fire and Dune, and he knows much more about this series than I do. Way more informative. Go check out Quinn's ideas. Because Dune has a lot of sequels, but the great thing is each novel feels like its own story. At least the first 3, and that's where I stopped. Honestly, after reading Dune, I didn't feel the need to read Dune Messiah, but my curiosity got the best of me, so I went ahead and bought the 2nd and 3rd books. They're totally fine books, but I think you can get away with just reading Dune. Next up, A Wizard of Earthsea. This might be my favorite fantasy novel of all time. Well, I feel like I'm too old to have favorite things, but if I could only get away with reading one fantasy novel for the rest of my life, this would be the one. A Wizard of Earthsea is the first book in the Earthsea cycle, written by Ursula K. Le Guin in 1968. The book follows the story of a young boy who will come to be known as Ged. When he is but a boy, his village is attacked by raiders, and Ged uses his latent magical powers to defend it. His aunt is like, "Well, you're a wizard, Ged," and attempts to train him, but he proves to be too powerful for her at her magic level. She's just a little old village witch, and Ged's power level is over 9,000. That's what you come to this channel for. Outdated memes. So anyway, she allows him to be taken by a man named Ogion, who is also a magic user, but much stronger than her. Ged proves to be too powerful and too curious even for Ogion. Is it Ogion or Ogion? Anyway, whatever this character's name is, he sends Ged off to be trained by a school of wizards. I know that sounds very Harry Potter, very King Killer Chronicles, but don't worry, unlike those novels, A Wizard of Earthsea is actually good.
You need to leave.
Yes. The cut flower sound of a man waiting to die. What the hell does that even mean? Get out of my face. Now, I won't spoil anything, but things take a dark turn when Ged gets to the magic school. Ged doesn't spend countless pages wondering how he's going to pay for tuition or playing the air guitar or whatever. He actually trains and interacts with 3-dimensional side characters. and they all occupy a believable, interesting world. Ged begins as a good student with amazing abilities. Because he is young and so naturally powerful, he is also overconfident and impatient. This leads Ged to make some questionable choices that have disastrous consequences. To impress his classmates, Ged performs a spell he can't control that backfires. And the only one that can undo the damage he caused is himself. Again, no spoilers, but the ending is the kind of ending that you might not see coming, but after you get there, you can't see the book coming to a close in any other way. It's so satisfying, just perfect. I know that's being very vague, but I'm trying not to spoil it. How Ged deals with his dilemma is a perfectly simple solution to a simple yet satisfying story. I can't recommend it enough. It might not remind you of A Song of Ice and Fire, but it is a refreshing story that shows you not every fantasy has to be a 1,000-page monstrosity. Not every fantasy novel has to be set in some fictional medieval world that looks like ye old Europe. Earthsea isn't weighed down by pointless filler, nor does it suffer from an aimless protagonist who spends more time worried about side quests than getting to the actual story. The Chandrian, what's their plan? I don't know, because the main character isn't even trying to fucking find out. What happened in book 2 when that ship Kavoth was on got attacked? No, don't tell us, don't dare do anything interesting. The slow regard of my ass. Earthsea, brilliant world building, amazing characterization, and zero transphobia. Ursula K. Le Guin was a great storyteller. Read all the books in the series. Read all her books. Next up, Dragonflight, book 1 of the Dragonriders of Pern series, written by Anne McCaffrey way back in July 1968. Wait.
Yeah, let me get 2 quick pics in the...
Darnell, that's you? Boy, look at you, boy, looking like 1968.
Go ahead on, boy.
Hey, now.
I'm not fooling with you today. I'm not fooling with you now.
Dragonflight takes place in the far-off future on the planet of Pern. The story follows a young woman named Lessa, who is more than meets the eye.
Oh, brother!
Who is the last survivor of a noble family. Her family's seat of power was called Ruatha Hold, and it was taken over by a man named Lord Fax. F-A-X, not F-A-C-T-S. Fax. Lord Fax waged a conquest to take over the many different domains in the land that are called holds. H-O-L-D-S. Holds. Think of a hold like a petty kingdom. Lord Fax now claims the title of Lord of Seven Holds, so Lord Fax Machine becomes the Lord of the Seven Kingdoms. Lessa considers him to be a usurper and hides out as a servant in Ruatha Hold, dreaming to one day take back what was once hers. Lessa is also blood of the dragon with the ability to become a dragon rider. You see what's happening? You see what's going on? Let's continue. A dragon rider comes to Ruatha Hold looking for people with noble bloodlines. Noble blood is needed for one to become a dragon rider, and the number of dragon riders in Pern has dropped considerably. This is bad because the celestial object known as the Red Star is set to return to their skies, and from the Red Star, an ancient enemy is coming. An enemy the people of Pern seem to have forgotten. It will be up to the dragon riders of Pern to defend the world. Lessa is discovered, she becomes a dragon rider. Her dragon is a queen of the dragons. It is the largest and most prettiest of all the dragons. Things get a little Mary Sue-ish sometimes. This series has a lot of sequels. Here's the list. Titles. However, the plot about the dragon riders fighting against the ancient enemy gets resolved within the first 3 or 4 books, so it's up to you if you want to read on, if you like, or not. The Dolphins of Pern book doesn't seem to be necessary unless you're a completionist. Fair warning, these books contain some dated concepts, especially if you're a member of the LGBTQ community. It's definitely a product of its time. I've only read the first couple of books in the series. Book 1 isn't entirely problematic, so I still recommend that one, especially if you're a Daenerys fan. Lessa is very much her prototype. I would have liked to put the Tamarier series on this list. I do have the first 3 books in the series, His Majesty's Dragon, Throne of Jade, and Black Powder War, but I haven't gotten around to reading them yet. My to-read pile, the to-read pile I have is very large, and I'm one of those people that just buys books, and I know I shouldn't. It's a problem. I know it's wrong. I know it's wrong. It's like my Steam library. I keep telling myself, I'm going to read this. I'm going to read that. I'm finally going to read Gormengeist. And you know what? I never do. I just buy 3 more books. I buy another game on Steam that's on sale, and I lie to myself. But you know what? That's my problem. Mind your business.
Who are you to judge me?
The last series on this list is the Accursed Kings series, a 7-book series Martin himself once called the original Game of Thrones, which covers why I think you should read it. The Accursed Kings is a historical fiction series written by Maurice Druon in 1955 and finished in 1977. 22 years from start to finish. Damn. If I was a cynical bastard, I'd say Martin was trying to copy Maurice, but at least Maurice finished. Anywho, the novels follow the extremely short reigns of several French kings. That's not a spoiler because it's right there in the title. These kings, they're accursed. Okay, so while I was editing, I realized I did not describe the plot to these books at all. So here's a quick summary. Okay, so boom. The reason why these kings are accursed is because one of the kings, Philip, also known as the Fair, he's also the titular Iron King of the first book. Early in his reign, he did some dirt. If you're a fan of history or a fan of the Assassin's Creed games, you might have heard of the Knights Templar. They were a military order, they did some crusading, whatever, right? And one thing about them is that they had a lot of money, whereas Philip the Fair, the Iron King, he did not. And so Philip was like, how can I get their money? What can I do? Oh, I know, lie. So Philip and some co-conspirators make up these lies about the Knights Templar. How their rituals were blasphemous, how they worshipped idols and demons, and the worst thing of all, that they were homosexuals.
You're a liar, a cheater, a sinner, and a homosexual.
You're not the nicest person on this app.
I sure ain't, but I'm the most Christian. And you know what? Ain't nothing.
Sword swallowers, through and through. The Vatican got involved, the Pope issued orders, the king was like, seize them. Some of the Templars were arrested and then tortured.
But we tortured some folks. We did some things that were contrary to our values.
Under duress, they admitted to all the stuff they were accused of. And that's when they were disbanded, and some of them were even burned at the stake. After that, King Philip was like, well, since their order is disbanded, what's going to happen with all their money? I guess I'll take it. But one of the leaders of the Knights Templar wasn't going out so easy. During his execution, he cursed the king, the pope, and some other conspirators. He said, for 13 generations, King Philip, your line will be cursed. And then he died. Now, of course, this is historical fiction, so who knows if any of this actually happened. And then again, magic isn't really a thing. But if you read the books or read the Wikipedia for each of these kings, it's like something strange was going on in the neighborhood because a lot of them died early. And then there were all these scandals and controversies and war. It seems like these kings, maybe they were accursed. And that's my summary. Back to the pre-recorded stuff. That's about it. See ya. In this series, you will find where Martin drew inspiration for several A Song of Ice and Fire characters, including Cersei, Robert, Tywin, the Queen of Thorns, the Hound, and Melisandre. Does that mean there's real magic in this series? I don't know. It's up to you and your interpretation. Obviously, there are no dragons because dragons aren't real. Or are they? There have been several photographs and videos that suggest the presence of an unknown species of flying creature. Corpses of such reptilian beast have been documented as well. In this photograph taken in 2002 in Tibet, you will see an aerial shot of a mountain range. Just there in the left corner, trailing in the clouds, are what appear to be the tails of 2 dragons. Or is it just more mountain?
Snap out of it!
What just happened? Anyway, if you're someone who likes the council scenes and verbal sparring between characters in A Song of Ice and Fire, I highly recommend reading this series. It's full of brilliant political intrigue. There are even a few shocking deaths. There's nothing on the scale of the Red Wedding, but a baby totally gets got. Like, this baby gets wrecked. I was not prepared. Just look at some of the titles in this series. The Strangled Queen, The Lily and the Lion, The Poisoned Crown. Martin said, "You made this?" No, I think I made this. Martin went to the Tarantino Academy of Writing Stories. For me, it was fascinating to experience a story that influenced Martin in writing A Song of Ice and Fire. As a writer myself, I like knowing where writers get their ideas from, what helped to shape their craft. I would say this is a must-read for any A Song of Ice and Fire fan. Oh, one final warning, the last book in the series is written completely different from the rest of them. It reads nothing like the previous novels. It's kind of bad, but just power through it. It's fine. It's fine. You'll live. It's okay. And that's it. 7 series to help you get through The Long Night. I promised this video over a year ago, and I'm finally getting to it. It's my bad.
Who are you to judge me?
This is why I say don't talk about doing something if it's not done or near done, because you doom yourself. But alright, let me know what you think in the comments section. Have you read these books? Do you plan on reading any of these books? Let me know. And make some recommendations of your own. I would love for my to-read pile to get even bigger. You might see your recommendations in a follow-up video. Like the video if you liked it, subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you to the following Patreon supporters, including Philip E., Daniel, and Jessica P. Memberships go for as little as $1 a month. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you all in the next one.